Okay, so language is one of these things which have been thought to kind of mark like a dividing line between humans and non-human animals. A number of years ago we thought that the differences between humans and non-human animals, what made humans special, was something to do with humans having a soul and non-humans not having a soul. This was an idea that Descartes put forward. We've since seen more other kinds of reasons that separate humans and animals. We've seen arguments that it is the use of tools. Humans use tools, other animals don't. When we found out that animals did indeed use tools, it became the fact that humans make tools but animals don't, and then we find that animals such as crows can actually make tools. And then it's also been argued that humans are the only creatures that have culture. We'll see in subsequent lectures that this probably isn't the case either. But language is one of the kind of real last battlegrounds in this ability to define a difference between humans. What makes humans special? Consciousness is another thing. I mean, in many ways, I think the argument is specious. It's a bit prejudicial. It's kind of human chauvinism. We're continually trying to understand, to prove, if you like, that humans are better in some ways than non-humans, because humans have something that non-human animals don't. So let's examine that to begin with before we start talking about language. First of all, we're going to be talking about whether it's unique to humans, then talking about different theories about how language is learned, the extent to which is language genetic, when the first human language seemed to happen, what it was like, what purpose did it serve, and then may say something about the future of language when we get to the end. So on this idea of is language unique to humans, there was very little known about animal communication. We knew that birds sang and dogs barked, but we didn't really know about what these words or these communication sounds actually meant. Cheney and Seyfarth was one of the first attempts to actually try and articulate what the meaning of these sentences were, if you can call them that, and it turned out that, in fact, vervet monkeys have different kinds of warning calls for different kinds of animals. So there's a warning call for a snake, there's a warning call for cheetahs, and there's a warning call for eagles. So far, as far as we can tell, there's only 3 different warning calls. The warning calls are acoustically distinct, which mean they sound different, and also they result in different behaviours. So if a vervet monkey makes a sound for snake, the other monkeys will tend to look into the canopy where they live, into the leaves and the trees where they live, which is where snakes tend to be. If they hear the call for eagle, they'll tend to look up in the sky, which is where eagles are. And if they hear the warning sound for cheetah, they'll tend to look down on the ground, because that's usually where cheetahs are to be found. So this is quite a sophisticated communication system here, but to some extent limited. It doesn't seem to be used for things other than basic warning calls. What is interesting about it is, though it's conditional, it might seem that these vervet monkeys are being terribly altruistic, maybe potentially putting themselves at risk by making a noise, drawing attention to themselves, which may mean that they're about to get eaten. But there is a sense, as I mentioned, that the extent to which these calls are made is conditional. So, for example, if a male has a rival who is potentially being threatened by one of these predators, then the male is less likely to make the call, because it is in his interests to for the rival to be potentially eradicated by one of these predators. A female who has children, and when the children are threatened, is much more likely to make the call, etc. So it's not necessarily pure altruism, nor is it kind of like an automatic response. The extent to which one of these animals makes a call is conditional upon the potential usefulness of making that call versus the potential usefulness, as we saw with rivals, of in fact keeping quiet. More recently, and I think this is one of the more astounding aspects of animal communication. If I say animal language, I do in the past, I apologise for that. Prairie dogs. Prairie dogs, there's a link. If you click on that link, it will take you to, I'll put the link in below YouTube here. If you click on that link, it will take you to some examples of this. There's Kon Slobodchikov done quite a lot of research on prairie dogs. Now, prairie dogs are quite small animals, kind of a bit like meerkats, live similar kind of lives. tend to be interrelated groups, and it was found that they have an extremely sophisticated communication system. Now, if you look at the video, if you just Google prairie dogs, Slobjikov or something like that, you'll hear it, and it just basically sounds like little chirps or squeaks. But if you do a sophisticated acoustic analysis of the sounds that prairie dogs make, then actually what you find out is that these are distinct, acoustically distinct utterances, to use that word. But the really impressive thing about this is that they can make calls to a novel object, an object that they will never have seen before. So various objects have been used, such as a black oval or a blue triangle, and one prairie dog will make a sound in the presence of that stimulus, and the sounds between the, say, blue triangle and the black oval will be different. So it seems that they've got some kind of rules which they're using to make sentences, for want of a better word, which can describe things that have never been seen before. So in another study, one of the later studies, they had the novel objects were in fact two women walking across the ground where the prairie dogs lived, wearing different coloured dresses, and the prairie dogs made distinct utterances. So what this means is that somewhere in the prairie dog's mind there must be rules for making up ways of describing things that have never seen before, which does have a lot of similarities with human language, although the extent to which we can push this and the real similarity and difference between this and what humans do has yet to be fathomed, because it's only until recently that we've really started exploring animal communications in a really fine-grained way, which is necessary in order to understand what's going on. Bees communicate very famously the location of nectar through the medium of dance. This is a really famous piece of work by Carl von Frisch. A lot of work into here discovering how bees manage to communicate the location of honey. We can see here we have a hive with different boxes, A, B, C and D. Here we have the hive, and so the bee flies out of the hive in, say, panel A and finds a flower. Now that flower, when the bee finds it, happens to be on a line between the hive and the sun. So when that bee goes back with a sample of the nectar that it's found, it does a dance. And if you notice here, it does a dance, what's called a round dance. So it does a clockwise here, like that. And then when it gets to the bottom, it then does a little, what's called a waggle dance. It waggles its abdomen up there, shakes its booty, and then goes back round again like this, does another circle, and then up there doing the waggle dance. Now, the angle of the dance to the perpendicular, to the right angle here, is the angle of the flowers, or the nectar source, to the sun. So we can here we say, okay, look guys, the nectar source is straight out of the hive, head towards the sun and you'll find it. In this case, the second case in panel B here, the same kind of thing happens. The bee finds a flower here. Now this case, the flower is at 60 degrees to the sun. The bee goes back, does the dance, and this time the angle to the perpendicular is 60 degrees, so the bees know that they need to fly out 60 degrees. I mean, they don't have protractors, okay? They're doing this by some clever computational mechanism in a brain that's not much bigger than a full stop. Really impressive piece of microcircuitry going on here. So they know to fly 60 degrees. Now, if it's 120 degrees, so in other words, if they've got to go the other way, then we simply do the 60 degrees, but instead of, we come down. So that means the bees know how to do 120 degrees. In this case, they go, if you like, from right to left going up. In this case, right to left going up. In this case, they're going from left to right going down. So that's how it distinguishes. If the flower's directly behind the hive, then we do exactly the same thing as we'd have done in panel A here, but in order to signify that it's behind, directly in line with the sun, but backwards rather than towards the sun, they come down. So very sophisticated communication here. Also, the bee can give some idea of how much nectar there is by the vigorousness at which they do the dance. If they're waggling a lot, they're going very quickly, looking excited, then that suggests there's a lot of stuff there, and that's used as a cue, and the other bees will decide whether to go out there, whether it's, you know, there's sufficient amount of nectar out there to bother, and also maybe how many of them need to go out there. Is it a lot? Well, we'll send a lot of bees out. Is there very little? Maybe just send a couple out. If there's extreme very little, then maybe nobody bothers going out there. And also it depends upon what the other bees are telling them, because other bees might be signaling the presence of other nectar sources. So kind of complicated, but very restricted. They can't say how far it is, they just say it's in that direction, and the idea here is that you just fly until eventually you find it, and as long as you're going in the right direction, you will eventually find it. So they can't communicate everything there, but it is sophisticated. The other thing they can't communicate is height. So if the flowers are assumed to be somewhere between ground level and maybe, if it's a bush, maybe 20-30 feet high, something like that for a flowering bush. Von Frisch rather cunningly got some flowers, some a nectar source, and stuck it on top of a radio mast. He then put a bee on top of it. The bee sampled the nectar, flew back to the hive, and tried to signal where the nectar was by doing these various dances. Obviously there's a lot of nectar there, so a whole crowd of bees came out looking for this nectar source. They got to the right place and ended up going round and round the bottom of this radio mast, and von Frisch's conclusion was that basically bees don't have a word for up. And the reason why they don't have a word for up, as he says, is that, well, there are no flowers in the sky. Not usually, unless put there by cheeky researchers. Okay, so bees have got incredibly sophisticated communication. We've seen prairie dogs, vervet monkeys, other animals. Most people, though, would say, and in the chapter in this textbook, our textbook, most people think that only humans have what we'd call a true language. Now, the word true, you might want to argue with that, because you could say, well, we use the word true to describe a human language. Is this your human chauvinism? Is this us saying, what you guys don't have is a language as sophisticated as ours? And we draw a nice clear line in the sand between what we have and what other animals have, and we say, you just don't have it. So is it just human chauvinism? And there are many other examples of animal communication which are very sophisticated in whales and dolphins and so on. Animals have certainly been taught language to some extent, although again there's debate about whether this is a true language or whether this approaches the sophistication of human language. Various people like Sue Savage-Rumbaugh and so on, and Terrace, in various attempts to train at chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, how to use language, normally through either sign language or punching some kind of computer keyboard, because chimpanzees and etc. don't have the range of vocalizations to speak in the way that we do. I'm not going to say much about that. There's a lot of work out there on that. My conclusion of that would be actually whether or not these animals actually ever taught to learn a language, they certainly don't acquire it in the same way that humans do. It's not a natural thing. They have to have teams of researchers training and spending hours and hours trying to do this, and very few of them seem to pass it on to others, so it's not something they really kind of fundamentally get as a useful way of getting what they need, a useful way of running their lives. So I finish this part by just a quotation from Jerry Fodor, Fodor, Beaver and Garrett here, in relation to this animal learning language problem. They say that a dog can be trained to walk on its hind legs does not prejudice the claim that bipedal gait is genetically coded in humans. The fact that we can learn to whistle like a lark does not prejudice the species specificity of birdsong. So it's not really saying anything about whether human language may or may not be innate. The fact that you can show that a chimpanzee may be able to do it, and I think an additional weight to this argument is the sheer amount of time and effort it takes to get these animals to speak or to use language in a way which even closely approximates humans. It takes so much effort. It seems that this isn't a natural way of doing things for them. Okay, that's the end of this section. There's other stuff on language which you can look at later. Thank you.